The deafening crash of fine china against Italian marble echoed through the grand ballroom of the Harrison estate. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd of New York's elite as all eyes turned to witness the catastrophe unfolding at the engagement party of the year. Alexander Pierce, 36, stood frozen in his immaculate Tom Ford suit, watching in horror as the woman responsible for the chaos scrambled on her hands and knees, gathering shards of what had been his mother's priceless Ming Dynasty serving platter, his jaw clenched tight enough to crack teeth. "Oops, my bad, everyone." The woman's voice was far too cheerful for someone who had just destroyed a $300,000 family heirloom. "Don't worry, I'm sure we can superglue this baby right back together." Alex's steely gray eyes narrowed as he studied the disaster in human form before him. Wild copper curls escaped from what had probably started as an elegant updo, and her emerald green dress, while stunning, had hiked dangerously high up her thighs as she crawled around collecting ceramic fragments. "Miss, please." He moved toward her, his voice cold and controlled. "You're only making it worse." She looked up, and for the first time Alex saw her face clearly. Something uncomfortable and unfamiliar twisted in his chest. Despite the mascara smudged beneath one eye and the lipstick slightly askew, she was captivating. "Well, aren't you just a ray of sunshine?" she quipped, rising to her feet and extending a hand smeared with chocolate mousse. "I'm Olivia Bennett. You can call me Liv. Everyone does. Well, except my therapist, but that's probably because I pay her not to." Alex stared at the offered hand as if she were holding out a live grenade. "Alexander Pierce," he replied, pointedly, ignoring her hand. "CEO of Pierce Industries and brother of the groom." "Ah, so you're the infamous evil empire Alex." Her eyes widened with recognition. "Emma's told me all about you. I'm her sister, the family disappointment," she added with a wink. Alex felt his temperature rising. Emma Bennett was his brother William's fiancée. Polished, refined, intelligent, and apparently the genetic opposite of this hurricane in heels. "If you'll excuse me," he said curtly, "I need to inform the staff about this incident." As he turned to walk away, her voice stopped him. "You know what your problem is, Alexander Pierce," she called after him, loud enough for nearby guests to hear. He shouldn't have taken the bait. He knew better. Yet he found himself turning back. "Enlighten me," he challenged, voice dripping with sarcasm. Olivia's grin was mischievous as she closed the distance between them, stopping close enough that he could smell her perfume, something light and citrusy that inexplicably made his mouth water. "You've forgotten how to live," she whispered, eyes locked on his. "But don't worry, I'm very good at reminding people." Without another word, she brushed past him, leaving the billionaire momentarily speechless, a condition Alexander Pierce had never experienced in his adult life. From across the room, William caught his eye and mouthed, "I'm sorry." Alex straightened his tie, composed his features, and strode toward the bar. He needed a drink, a strong one, and perhaps a restraining order against Olivia Bennett. What he didn't need, what he absolutely, positively did not need, was the way his heart had inexplicably accelerated when she'd locked those sparkling green eyes on his. It was going to be a long 3 months until the wedding. Alexander Pierce did not have time for this nonsense. As CEO of Pierce Industries, a global technology empire valued at $87 billion, his calendar was meticulously managed in 15-minute increments. There were quarterly projections to review, a major acquisition in Singapore to finalize, and 3 board members threatening mutiny over his aggressive expansion into renewable energy. Yet here he was, sitting in a pastel-colored bakery that looked like a unicorn had vomited glitter across every surface, watching Olivia Bennett shovel cake samples into her mouth with the enthusiasm of someone who'd been recently rescued from a deserted island. Oh my God. Her eyes rolled back dramatically as she savored another bite. "This champagne elderflower one is like having an orgasm in your mouth." Alex nearly choked on his espresso. The elderly couple at the next table gasped audibly. "Ms. Bennett," he hissed, "could you possibly conduct yourself with an ounce of decorum?" Liv licked frosting from her finger with deliberate slowness. Her eyes locked challengingly on his. "Could you possibly remove that titanium rod from your posterior, Mr. Pierce?" 2 weeks had passed since the engagement party disaster, and somehow, through a series of unfortunate events involving his brother's sudden business trip to Tokyo and Emma's tearful pleas, Alex had been roped into accompanying Olivia to various wedding appointments. "Remind me again why we couldn't reschedule these meetings." Alex checked his watch pointedly. "Because, Scrooge McDuck," Liv said, pushing another cake sample toward him. "Good vendors book up 18 months in advance in New York. Emma and Will were lucky to get these appointments. Now try this one. It's lavender honey with edible gold leaf." Against his better judgment, Alex accepted the bite she offered. The flavor was exquisite. Subtle, not too sweet. His expression must have betrayed his approval because Liv's face lit up with triumph. "Ha! I knew it! Mr. I only consume protein shakes and business rivals actually like something whimsical." Despite himself, the corner of Alex's mouth twitched upward. "I wouldn't go that far." The bakery owner approached their table, a plump woman with flour, perpetually dusting her apron. "Have we made a decision, dears?" "We'll need the lavender honey for the main cake with champagne elderflower for the groom's cake," Liv decided. "And can you do that sugar sculpture of the Manhattan skyline we discussed? Emma will absolutely flip." Alex's eyes widened at the casual way she committed to what he knew would be an astronomical expense. "Perhaps we should discuss the budget. Before—" "Oh, don't be silly, Alex," Liv interrupted, waving dismissively. "You have more money than God. Let's splurge a little on your only brother's wedding." After settling the details and leaving the bakery, they stepped into the crisp autumn air of the New York afternoon. Liv consulted her phone, scrolling through Emma's meticulously organized wedding planning spreadsheet. Next up, florist on Madison, then final fitting for the bridesmaids' dresses. She glanced up at him with a teasing smile. "Don't worry, I brought a blindfold for you during the dress part. Wouldn't want to scandalize your delicate sensibilities." "I have a conference call at 3, Alex protested, already reaching for his phone to have his driver pick them up. "Cancel it," Liv said simply, grabbing his wrist to stop him. The unexpected contact sent a jolt of electricity up his arm. "Your brother's wedding is more important than whatever corporate empire building you have scheduled." Alex stared at her, torn between irritation and an unsettling fascination. Olivia Bennett operated on an entirely different wavelength than anyone he'd ever known. While the women in his social circle were calculating and strategic in their pursuit of wealth and status, Liv seemed utterly unconcerned with impressing him. "Fine," he conceded, "but we're taking my car." He gestured to the sleek black Bentley, waiting at the curb. "Of course we are," Liv rolled her eyes. "Heaven forbid Alexander Pierce takes the subway like a mere mortal." As they settled into the luxurious leather seats, Alex found himself stealing glances at her profile. Today, she'd tamed her wild copper curls into a messy bun with tendrils framing her face. She wore jeans, actual denim, not the designer variety, with a vintage band t-shirt and an oversized cardigan that looked like it had been handed down through generations. She caught him staring and raised an eyebrow. "Take a picture, it'll last longer." "I'm just trying to understand you," he admitted before he could stop himself. "Well, that's your first mistake, Alex," she said, her voice softening as she met his gaze. "I'm not a business problem to solve or a spreadsheet to analyze. I'm just Liv." For the first time in years, Alexander Pierce was genuinely intrigued by another human being, and it terrified him. The Pierce family estate in the Hamptons sprawled across 12 pristine oceanfront acres, a monument to old money and architectural extravagance. The main house, a colonial masterpiece with modern additions, stood proudly against the Atlantic horizon, its windows gleaming in the late afternoon sun. Alex checked his watch for the 5th time in as many minutes. The family dinner was scheduled to begin at 7 sharp, and his parents were sticklers for punctuality. His mother, Victoria Pierce, former debutante and reigning queen of Manhattan's social scene, had been hosting these Friday night gatherings since Alex and William were children. Tonight, however, would not follow the usual script of business. talk and gentle probing into Alex's perpetual bachelorhood. Tonight, his future sister-in-law would be joining them, along with her parents and, God help him, Olivia. "You're pacing," William observed from the doorway of the study, looking annoyingly relaxed in casual designer wear. "I'm not pacing," Alex snapped, stopping abruptly. "I'm strategizing." William laughed, crossing the room to pour 2 generous whiskeys from the crystal decanter. "It's a family dinner, not a hostile takeover. With Olivia Bennett involved, I'm not convinced there's a difference." Alex accepted the drink, downing half in one swallow. The past 3 weeks of wedding preparations had been an exercise in patience he hadn't known. He possessed. Olivia challenged him at every turn, from questioning his taste in wine to dragging him to a karaoke bar after their last vendor meeting. To his horror, he'd found himself enjoying her company, even looking forward to their appointments. "She's not that bad," William said, studying his brother with unusual intensity. "In fact, if I didn't know better." The doorbell's chime saved Alex from whatever observation his brother was about to make. Moments later, Victoria Pierce's voice echoed through the marble foyer, welcoming the Bennett family with practiced warmth. Alex steeled himself and followed William downstairs. Emma Bennett, poised, elegant, and clearly cut from the same cloth as their social circle, greeted him with a polite kiss on the cheek. Her parents, Robert and Catherine, were equally refined, her father a federal judge, and her mother a former ballerina. And then there was Olivia. She wore a simple black dress that somehow looked both sophisticated and rebellious on her frame. Her wild hair had been tamed into loose waves, and she'd applied just enough makeup to enhance her features without masking her freckles. The overall effect was stunning. "Alexander," she grinned wickedly, ignoring his outstretched hand and pulling him into a hug. "Your house is absolutely bananas. I counted 3 fountains just in the driveway." Alex stiffened at the unexpected embrace, catching a whiff of her now familiar citrus scent before she pulled away. "Ms. Bennett, glad you could join us." "Oh, don't Ms. Bennett me after I've seen you drunk singing Total Eclipse of the Heart." "Last week," she whispered, too low for the others to hear. Alex felt heat crawling up his neck as Victoria appeared at his side, eyeing Olivia with thinly veiled assessment. "So, you're the famous Olivia," his mother said. "Emma has told us so much about you." "All lies, I assure you," Liv quipped. "Except the part about me being banned from the Plaza Hotel. That's unfortunately true, but in my defense, how was I supposed to know the fountain wasn't for swimming?" Victoria's perfectly composed face flickered with what might have been amusement or horror before she guided them toward the dining room. Dinner proceeded with surprising smoothness until dessert, when Victoria turned her attention to Olivia. "Emma tells me you're a... what was it again, dear?" "I'm a children's book illustrator," Liv said, her smile never faltering. "I draw pictures that hopefully make kids laugh and want to read more." "How creative," Victoria replied in a tone that suggested creative was adjacent to unemployed in her vocabulary. "And do you make a living from that?" "Mother," Alex intervened, surprising himself. "That's hardly..." "It's okay, Alex," Liv said, touching his arm briefly. "I do quite well, Mrs. Pierce. My last book won the Caldecott Medal, and I've illustrated for several major publishers. I actually donated half of my advance from my newest series to the Children's Hospital where I volunteer on weekends." A moment of silence fell over the table, as everyone, Alex included, recalibrated their understanding of Olivia Bennett. "Well," Robert Bennett said proudly, "our Liv has always marched to her own drummer, but she's got a heart of gold." The conversation shifted, but Alex found himself watching Olivia with new eyes. Beneath her chaotic exterior was a depth he hadn't fully appreciated. Later, as the evening wound down, he found her alone on the terrace, gazing at the moonlit ocean. "You never mentioned your success," he said, joining her at the railing. Liv shrugged. "You never asked. Too busy judging the packaging to wonder about the contents." The gentle rebuke stung because it was true. "I'm sorry," he said simply. She turned to him, genuine surprise in her eyes. Did the great Alexander Pierce just apologize? Should I check if hell has frozen over? He laughed. A real laugh. Not the carefully controlled chuckle he used in business settings. I'm capable of admitting when I'm wrong. Once every decade, apparently, she teased, but her smile was warm. A comfortable silence fell between them as they looked out at the water. There's a charity gala next weekend, Alex said suddenly, for the Art Museum's education program. Would you like to attend? With me? The invitation surprised them both. Liv studied him, her expression unreadable for once. Like a date? She asked. Like, I'd enjoy your company, he answered honestly. Her slow smile lit up, something in his chest. Well, in that case, Mr. Pierce, she said, extending her hand formally, I accept your invitation. As he took her hand, Alex had the unsettling realization that somewhere between broken china and family dinners, Olivia, Bennett had begun to matter to him in ways he wasn't prepared to analyze. The Metropolitan Museum of Art glowed with elegant lighting, transformed for the annual Education Foundation Gala. New York's elite mingled beneath priceless artworks, champagne flutes in hand, diamonds glittering like constellations against the backdrop of designer gowns and tuxedos. Alexander Pierce stood at the entrance, checking his watch for the third time. Olivia was 15 minutes late, which, he reminded himself, was actually early by her typically chaotic standards. He tried to ignore the irrational fear that she might not show. Then he saw her, and time seemed to stop. Olivia Bennett ascended the grand staircase in a deep emerald gown that flowed like liquid around her curves. Her copper hair was swept up in an intricate style that somehow managed to look both elegant and moments from coming undone. She wore minimal jewelry, just simple diamond studs that had been her grandmother's, she would later tell him, letting her natural beauty command attention. As their eyes met, her nervous expression bloomed into a radiant smile that knocked the air from his lungs. Sorry I'm late, she said, reaching him slightly breathless. My cab driver decided to give me his life story and take the scenic route, through Times Square. You could have called. I would have sent my driver, Alex replied, then mentally kicked himself for sounding like a lecturing parent rather than an appreciative date, and missed the chance to hear about Jorge's 7 grandchildren and his theory about extraterrestrial influence on the stock market. She grinned, looping her arm through his. Not a chance. Despite himself, Alex smiled. You look beautiful, Liv. Her eyes widened slightly at the compliment, a faint blush coloring her cheeks. You clean up pretty well yourself, Pierce. As they entered the gala, Alex became acutely aware of the stares and whispers following them. Alexander Pierce. New York's most eligible bachelor and notorious workaholic, with the vibrant, unpredictable younger sister of his future sister-in-law. The gossip columns would have a field day. To his surprise, he found he didn't care. Mr. Pierce, the museum director approached, hand extended. So glad you could join us tonight. Your donation to the children's program was exceptionally generous. The pleasure is mine, Dr. Reynolds. May I introduce Olivia Bennett? She's a Caldecott-winning children's book illustrator. The pride in his voice surprised even him. Dr. Reynolds's face lit up. Ms. Bennett, your work is extraordinary. The watercolor series you did for Moonlight Adventures brought such wonder to the page. Liv beamed. Thank you, that series was special to me. We're actually developing a new children's area in the museum. Perhaps you'd be interested in consulting on the project. As the conversation continued, Alex watched Olivia in her element. Passionate, articulate, her hands animating her words as she discussed the importance of making art accessible to children of all backgrounds. The woman beside him was a far cry from the chaos-inducing whirlwind who had crashed into his life at the engagement party. Or perhaps he realized this depth had always been there. He simply hadn't bothered to look. The evening progressed with dinner and dancing. Alex was surprised to discover that beneath her typically frenetic energy, Olivia moved with natural grace on the dance floor. Years of reluctant ballet lessons, she explained as he twirled her effortlessly. Mom insisted. I quit when I was 16 to join a modern dance troupe instead. Nearly gave her a heart attack. I'm beginning to think there are many layers to Olivia Bennet, Alex said, pulling her slightly closer as the music slowed. Whereas Alexander Pierce is exactly what he appears to be on the surface, she challenged, green eyes sparkling with mischief. And what's that? A ruthlessly efficient business machine with impeccable suits and a spreadsheet for a heart, she replied, but her teasing tone softened the words. Is that really how you see me? He asked, suddenly needing to know her answer. Liv's expression grew serious as she studied his face. No, she said quietly. Not anymore. The moment hung between them, charged with unspoken possibility. They were interrupted by a sharp crack of thunder that shook the museum windows. The elegant crowd murmured in surprise as torrential rain began hammering against the glass. Ladies and gentlemen, announced the event coordinator, the National Weather Service has just issued a severe storm warning for Manhattan. We suggest you begin making arrangements to return home safely. The gala began dissolving into a flurry of activity, as guests called drivers and collected coats. I should get you home, Alex said, reluctantly releasing Liv from their dance. Outside, the storm had transformed New York into a watercolor painting of blurred lights and glistening streets. Alex's driver pulled up, and they dashed through, the downpour toward the Bentley. Even the short sprint left them soaked. Olivia laughed as she collapsed into the leather seat, raindrops clinging to her eyelashes like tiny diamonds. Where to, Miss Bennet? Alex asked as the car pulled away from the curb. Liv hesitated, then made a decision that would change everything. Your place is closer, isn't it? She said, her voice soft, but certain. I'm soaked to the bone and this storm isn't letting up anytime soon. Their eyes met in the dim light of the car's interior, the air between them electric with more than just the storm outside. As you wish, Alex replied, his voice lower than intended. As Manhattan's glittering skyline blurred and the rain streaked windows, Alexander Pierce realized he was venturing into uncharted territory, a place where spreadsheets and strategic planning offered no guidance. And for the first time in his meticulously controlled life, he was perfectly fine with that. Alexander Pierce's Manhattan penthouse occupied the top 2 floors of a sleek glass tower overlooking Central Park. Floor-to-ceiling windows showcased the storm raging over the city skyline, lightning occasionally illuminating the minimalist space in harsh flashes. This is exactly what I expected, Liv said as she wandered through the living room, trailing her fingertips over the edge of a sleek leather sofa. Modern, expensive, and completely devoid of personality. Alex raised an eyebrow as he handed her a fluffy, white towel. I prefer the term curated. Of course you do, she laughed, dabbing at her damp hair. Let me guess. You hired some overpriced designer who charged you a fortune to make your home look like a luxury hotel lobby. I'll have, you know that Architectural Digest featured this place last year, he replied, unable to keep the defensive edge from his voice. Liv's eyes sparkled with mischief. Oh, well, if Architectural Digest approves, then who am I to question it? She continued her exploration, pausing at the wall of windows to watch the storm. Her gown, still damp from the rain, clung to her curves, in a way that made Alex struggle to maintain his trademark composure. I should find you something dry to wear, he said, turning toward his bedroom. 10 minutes later, Olivia emerged from his guest bathroom wearing his Harvard Business School t-shirt and a pair of sweatpants rolled several times at the waist. Her face was scrubbed clean of makeup, her hair pulled into a messy bun atop her head. She looked more beautiful than she had at the gala. Much better, she sighed, curling her bare feet beneath her as she settled onto his sofa. Though I'm pretty sure these sweatpants cost more than my monthly rent. Alex, who had changed into jeans and a casual button-down, handed her a glass of red wine. Exaggeration doesn't become you, Ms. Bennet. Fine, half my rent, she amended, accepting the glass with a grateful smile. For a moment they sat in comfortable silence watching the storm lash against the windows. You know, Liv said suddenly, for someone who supposedly hated me on sight, you've been remarkably chivalrous tonight. Alex took a careful sip of his wine. I never hated you. Oh, please. You looked at me like I was something stuck to the bottom of your imported Italian loafers. You shattered a priceless family heirloom while making jokes about superglue, he reminded her. Details, details, she waved dismissively. The point is, you've been different lately, almost human. Perhaps you're simply seeing the real me for the first time, he suggested. Liv studied him over the rim of her wine glass. And what if I like what I see? The question hung in the air between them, charged with possibility. Before Alex could respond, his phone buzzed insistently. On the coffee table, glancing at the screen, he frowned. It's William. I should take this. He stepped away, leaving Liv alone with her racing thoughts and the spectacular view. Whatever was happening between her and Alexander Pierce had escalated with dizzying speed. Just weeks ago, she'd written him off as an arrogant, soulless businessman, exactly the type of man she'd always avoided. Now she found herself in his apartment wearing his clothes, contemplating possibilities that made her stomach flutter with nervous anticipation. Alex returned, his expression troubled. Everything okay? She asked. Not exactly. He ran a hand through his perfectly styled hair, disheveling it in a way that made him look younger, more vulnerable. William and Emma have postponed the wedding. What? Liv sat up straight, wine forgotten. Why? What happened? Alex sank onto the sofa beside her. Apparently, they've been having some fundamental disagreements about their future. Emma wants children right away. William wants to wait until his new Tokyo office is established. They've decided to take some time to reconsider. Oh no, Liv murmured, her heart aching for her sister. I should call her. William says she's with your parents for the weekend. She asked for space. Liv nodded, knowing that was Emma's way. Retreat, reflect, then respond. The Bennett sisters might be different in almost every way, but they both needed time alone. When upset. This complicates things, Alex said quietly after a moment. The wedding planning, you mean? No. His gray eyes met hers, intense and serious. This, us. The directness of his statement startled her. Is there an us, Alexander? Instead of answering, he reached out, tucking a stray curl behind her ear, his fingers lingering against her cheek. The simple touch sent electricity coursing through her veins. There shouldn't be, he said, his voice low. You're nothing like the women I usually date. You're chaotic and impulsive and completely baffling to me most of the time. Wow, don't hold back on the compliments, she said, trying for sarcasm but achieving only breathlessness. But, he continued, moving imperceptibly closer, I can't. Stop thinking about you, about your laugh, your ridiculous stories, the way you see beauty in things I've always overlooked. Liv swallowed hard, her pulse hammering in her throat. If that's your idea of a romantic declaration, you need serious help. A rare, genuine smile transformed his face. I've been told I'm somewhat deficient in expressing emotion. Shocking, she whispered, but found herself leaning toward him, drawn by a force beyond her control. When their lips finally met, it was like coming home to a place she'd never been before. His kiss was tentative at first, then deepening as she responded with enthusiasm, her fingers tangling in his hair. A crash of thunder shook the apartment as they broke apart, both slightly dazed. Well, Liv said, attempting to gather her scattered thoughts. That was unexpected? Alex supplied, his usual composure notably absent. I was going to say inevitable, she corrected, a slow smile spreading across her face. He reached for her again, but she placed a gentle hand on his chest, stopping him. Alex, we need to talk about Emma and William first if they're having problems. You're right, he sighed, reluctantly putting space between them. Their situation complicates this. If they don't reconcile, the unspoken implication hung in the air. If Emma and William didn't get back together, what did that mean for whatever was blossoming between Alex and Liv? One problem at a time, Liv said firmly. First, we help our siblings figure out their relationship. Then, She trailed off, suddenly uncertain. Then we figure out ours, Alex finished, taking her hand and lacing their fingers together. As the storm raged outside, they talked into the night, about their siblings, their childhoods, their hopes and fears. For the first time in his life, Alexander Pierce spoke openly about his father's impossible expectations, his mother's emotional distance, and the crushing responsibility of the Pierce legacy. And for the first time in her life, Olivia Bennet felt truly seen by someone who had initially dismissed her, only to discover the woman beneath the chaos. By the time the storm cleared and dawn broke over Manhattan, something fundamental had shifted between them, something neither had been looking for, yet both now feared losing. 1 month later, Central Park bloomed in vibrant autumn colors, the trees aflame with red and gold beneath a crisp blue sky. Alexander Pierce sat on a bench near the boathouse, tugging at his collar despite the cool temperature. He checked his watch, an unconscious habit rather than actual impatience. "You're fidgeting," William observed, sitting beside his brother with uncharacteristic calm. "I've never seen you fidget." "I'm not fidgeting," Alex insisted, immediately stilling his hands. "I'm contemplating." William smirked. "Right. Contemplating how Olivia Bennet turned my control-freak brother into a lovesick teenager. I am the CEO of a multi-billion-dollar corporation," Alex reminded him stiffly. "Not a lovesick anything." Says the man who flew to Philadelphia for 12 hours just because she mentioned missing authentic cheesesteaks. Alex couldn't argue with that. The past month had transformed his meticulously organized life into something unpredictable and infinitely more colorful. Olivia had spent more nights at his penthouse than her own apartment, gradually infusing his sterile space with her essence. Forgotten scarf draped over a chair, colorful sketch pads scattered on his dining table, ridiculous refrigerator magnets he pretended to hate. More significantly, she'd begun infiltrating the carefully guarded chambers of his heart. "Have you talked to Emma yet?" Alex asked, steering the conversation away from his own emotional evolution. William's expression softened. "Last night. We've agreed to meet this afternoon to discuss everything." After the wedding postponement, the Bennet and Pierce siblings had formed an unlikely alliance. While Liv supported Emma through her doubts and fears, Alex had shown uncharacteristic patience with William's indecision, offering counsel without judgment. "And?" Alex prompted. William took a deep breath. "And I'm going to tell her I was an idiot, that I love her more than any business venture, that I want whatever future she wants as long as we're together." Alex clapped his brother on the shoulder. "Good man. What about you and Liv?" William asked, studying his brother's face. "Are you finally going to tell her?" Before Alex could respond, his phone buzzed with a text from Olivia. "Operation Lovebirds in progress. Emma en route to Japanese garden. Prepare your brother for maximum groveling." Alex smiled and stood, pulling William to his feet. "That's your cue. Emma's waiting in the Japanese garden." William straightened his jacket, suddenly nervous. "Does she know I'll be there?" "Liv has her convinced they're meeting for sister time," Alex explained, giving his brother a gentle push toward the path. "The rest is up to you." As William headed toward his future, Alex checked his watch once more, then set off in the opposite direction, toward the Bethesda fountain where Olivia had promised to meet him after dispatching Emma. He found her sketching on a bench, copper hair whipping around her face in the breeze, completely absorbed in her work. For a moment he simply watched her, marveling at how this chaotic whirlwind of a woman had upended everything he thought he knew about love and life. "Spying is rude, Pierce," she called without looking up, somehow sensing his presence. "Even for billionaires." "I prefer the term strategic observation," he countered, joining her on the bench and placing a gentle kiss on her temple. She closed her sketchbook and leaned into him. "Mission accomplished. Emma's on her way to either reconcile with your brother or murder him. I left it ambiguous." "Encouraging," Alex laughed. William seemed appropriately remorseful and determined. "Good." Liv nestled closer, her warmth a pleasant contrast to the autumn chill. Those two belong together, even if they're both too stubborn to realize it sometimes. Alex took her hand, running his thumb over her knuckles. Speaking of stubborn people belonging together, Liv raised an eyebrow. Alexander Pierce, if you're about to compare our relationship to our siblings' drama, I may have to reconsider my excellent taste in men. Actually, he said, his heart racing in a way no business negotiation had ever triggered, I was going to suggest a more permanent arrangement. Her green eyes widened as he produced a small velvet box from his pocket. Alex, she breathed, what are you doing? Something impulsive and completely out of character, he admitted, opening the box to reveal a stunning emerald ring surrounded by diamonds, which seems appropriate, given that's what you've been since the moment you crashed into my life. We've only known each other 2 months, she protested weakly, her eyes fixed on the ring. And I've never been more certain of anything in my life, he replied, taking her hand. Olivia Bennett, you turned my perfectly ordered existence upside down, and I never want it right side up again. Will you marry me? Tears glistened in her eyes as she looked from the ring to his face. Are you sure? I'm still the chaos-causing disaster who broke your mother's priceless serving platter. You're the woman who taught me that a life without spontaneity and joy isn't worth all the success in the world, he corrected. You're the woman I love, Liv, broken china and all. A brilliant smile bloomed across her face. Well, when you put it that way. Instead of answering with words, she threw her arms around his neck and kissed him thoroughly, nearly knocking them both off the bench in her enthusiasm. I'll take that as a yes? He laughed against her lips. Yes, 1,000 times yes, she confirmed, pulling back to beam at him as he slid the ring onto her finger. Although your mother might have a heart attack when she finds out. She'll survive, Alex assured her, pulling her close again. Besides, she's grown rather fond of you since you redesigned the children's wing at her hospital charity. Bribery through art, Liv nodded sagely. Works every time. As they sat together by the fountain, planning their future with a mixture of his precision and her spontaneity, Alex's phone buzzed with a text from William. She said yes, wedding back on. Best man duties resumed. Liv peered at the message and grinned. Should we tell them our news? Let's give them their moment, Alex decided, pulling her close. We'll have plenty of time for announcements. Alexander Pierce, suggesting patience? Who are you and what have you done with my arrogant billionaire? She teased, her eyes dancing with joy. I've been thoroughly corrupted by a certain impulsive redhead, he admitted, brushing his lips against hers. And I couldn't be happier about it. As the autumn sun cast golden light across the park, Alex realized how profoundly his life had changed since that fateful night, when Olivia Bennett had crashed into his meticulously ordered world. The chaos she'd brought hadn't ruined his life, as he'd initially feared. It had saved him from a life half-lived. 6 months later, a small article appeared in the New York Times Society section. In a surprise twist that has Manhattan's elite social circles buzzing, a double wedding ceremony took place yesterday at the Pierce estate in the Hamptons. William Pierce, CFO of Pierce Industries, wed Emma Bennett, while his brother Alexander Pierce, CEO, married Emma's younger sister, Olivia Bennett, a renowned children's book illustrator. Sources close to the family report that the typically stoic Alexander appeared blissfully happy as his bride approached the altar in a non-traditional emerald green gown. Victoria Pierce, mother of the grooms, was reportedly overheard saying, I suppose if anyone could melt that boy's frozen heart, it would be a Bennett sister. The two couples will honeymoon separately, the elder in Paris, while Alexander and Olivia embark on what the bride described as a spontaneous adventure with no itinerary whatsoever, much to the reported horror of the famously schedule-oriented CEO. When asked about future plans, Olivia Pierce, née Bennett, simply smiled and said, We're writing our story one chaotic page at a time. Emma and William Pierce welcomed twins, a boy and a girl, exactly 1 year after their wedding. William established the Tokyo office, but arranged to work remotely half the year to be with his family. Robert and Catherine Bennett retired to a cottage in Vermont. where they regularly hosted family gatherings that grew increasingly chaotic and joyful with each passing year. Victoria Pierce surprised everyone by developing a close relationship with her younger daughter-in-law, even allowing Olivia to redecorate portions of the family estate with what she grudgingly admitted was tasteful whimsy. As for Alexander and Olivia Pierce, they found balance in their seemingly incompatible approaches to life. Alex learned to embrace spontaneity and joy, while Liv discovered the benefits of occasional structure and planning. Their home, a completely renovated penthouse that combined his sleek minimalism with her vibrant aesthetics, became a testament to how opposites not only attract, but can create something more beautiful together than apart. 2 years after their wedding, they welcomed a daughter named Sophia, who inherited her father's sharp mind and her mother's wild spirit. Alex proved to be a doting father who read bedtime stories with different voices for each character and never complained when finger painting resulted in ruined designer suits. In quiet moments, he would sometimes reflect on how differently his life might have unfolded if Olivia hadn't crashed into that serving platter at his brother's engagement party, and silently thank whatever twist of fate had brought his beautiful chaos into his life.
The Lighthouse, San Francisco, Michelin-starred restaurant. Ethan Crawford sat at his reserved table. 37 years old, billionaire, tech empire CEO, worth billions. He was celebrating. Just closed a $200 million deal. Champagne, Dom Perignon, oysters. His partners were laughing. Then Ethan had an idea. A cruel joke. The waitress serving them, young, 26 maybe. He'd ask her for financial advice, watch her stammer, embarrass her in front of his partners. For laughs, he turned to her, condescending smile. Asked what she'd advise for investing $200 million. Expected her to stutter, to be humiliated. But Sarah Martinez didn't stutter. She opened her mouth and spoke. Perfect financial analysis, portfolio diversification, emerging markets, renewable energy strategies, hedging against inflation. Analysis so sophisticated his partners stopped laughing, stared at her with mouths open. But that wasn't what destroyed Ethan. It was what she said next. She leaned in, looked him in the eyes, and said, "The real problem isn't the money. The real problem is you have all that wealth and no idea what it means to be truly rich. You're a poor man in a golden prison." Then she walked away. Ethan sat frozen, because she was right, and that terrified him. Ethan Crawford never thought a waitress could teach him something about life. At 37, he was one of the richest men in America, CEO of a tech empire worth billions with residences in New York City, Los Angeles, and Miami. That November night, sitting at his reserved table at the Michelin-starred restaurant Lighthouse on the coast of San Francisco, he had decided to play a cruel joke. He would ask for financial advice from the young waitress serving him, expecting an embarrassing response to ridicule with his business partners. But when Sarah Martinez, 26, economics degree holder, forced to wait tables to pay her sick father's debts, opened her mouth and spoke those words with an icy calm that cut through the air like a razor, Ethan felt the world stop. Because this waitress in the black uniform and red apron had not only answered his question with precision that would shame his best financial analysts, but had also unmasked the empty and arrogant man he had become. And in that moment, something broke, and something began. The Lighthouse restaurant was a gem embedded on the San Francisco coast, with breathtaking views of the Pacific Ocean and a menu that cost as much as the monthly salary of an average American. 3 Michelin stars, 6-month waiting lists, international clientele composed of celebrities, aristocrats, and tycoons. Ethan Crawford frequented it so often he had a permanently reserved table by the panoramic window, the best in the house. That November night, Ethan was accompanied by 3 of his closest collaborators: Marcus, the CFO of his company, Stephen, head of acquisitions, and Daniel, his personal attorney. They had just closed a $200 million deal and were celebrating with champagne, Dom Perignon, and oysters. The atmosphere was euphoric, arrogant, typical of men who believe they own the world. Ethan Crawford was the embodiment of modern success. Tall, athletic despite countless business dinners, dark hair slicked back with maniacal precision, gray eyes cold as steel, always dressed in custom suits that cost more than a car. He had built from scratch a tech empire starting from a small office in Silicon Valley 15 years ago, when he was only 22. Now his company, Crawford Tech, was publicly traded and dominated the enterprise software sector in North America. Forbes had included him in the list of the 100 richest men under 40, but success had a price. Ethan had become cynical, distant, arrogant. He saw people as pawns to move, numbers on a balance sheet, tools to achieve objectives. He had divorced 2 years ago from a model who had married him for the money and cheated on him with her personal trainer. Since then, his relationships were transactions, dates with beautiful but empty women, relationships that lasted just long enough to get bored. No real emotional connection. That night, while waiting for the second course, Ethan noticed the waitress serving them. She was new. He had never seen her before. Young, perhaps 25 or 26 years old, with brown hair pulled back in an elegant bun, delicate features that made her almost excessively beautiful for a waitress, hazel eyes that seemed to hide intelligence beyond the professional facade. The black uniform and red apron of the restaurant couldn't conceal a natural grace in her movements. Sarah Martinez was in her 3rd month at the lighthouse. She had accepted the job out of pure desperation. Economics degree from UC Berkeley. Top grades. She had worked 2 years at a Barcelona investment bank. But when her father got sick with cancer and medical expenses began to pile up, insurance covered only part of the experimental treatments that offered hope. Sarah had to make decisions. She had exhausted her savings, taken out loans, and finally had to leave her job at the bank to dedicate herself full-time to caring for her father and finding ways to pay the growing debts. The waitress job at the lighthouse paid surprisingly well thanks to generous tips from wealthy clients, though it meant humbling herself, serving people who often treated her as if she were invisible, or worse, as a talking decoration piece. But Sarah had learned to endure. For her father, she would do anything. That night, while serving the second course at Ethan Crawford's table, she didn't imagine her life was about to change. She had recognized Ethan immediately. It was impossible not to recognize one of the most famous faces in the American business world, but she had remained professional, distant as always. It was after she filled the wine glasses that Ethan, tipsy from champagne and success, had an idea his tablemates found hilarious. He turned to Sarah with an arrogant smile and said something that should have been a joke, a way to amuse himself at the expense of a waitress who had no way to respond. Ethan asked Sarah in a deliberately condescending tone what her advice would be for investing $200 million. He said he was looking for fresh perspectives, perhaps from someone who lives in the real world. His partners laughed, anticipating the embarrassing spectacle of a waitress stammering economic incomprehension. But Sarah didn't stammer. For a long moment, she looked him straight in the eyes with an expression Ethan couldn't decipher. Then, with a calm and perfectly modulated voice, she began to speak. She spoke of portfolio diversification in specific emerging markets, cited recent macroeconomic trends, mentioned undervalued tech sectors with exponential growth projections, discussed hedging strategies against looming inflation, and concluded with an analysis so precise and sophisticated of opportunities in the renewable energy sector that Ethan's 3 partners stopped laughing and stared at her with mouths open. But it wasn't the financial analysis that silenced Ethan. It was what Sarah said at the end, after answering his question with competence that rivaled his best consultants. She leaned in slightly, looking directly into his eyes with that intensity that hurt, and said in a low but perfectly audible voice, "But you see, Mr. Crawford, the $200 million isn't the real problem. The real problem is that you have all that money and have no idea what it means to be truly rich. Because true wealth isn't measured in bank accounts, but in human connections, in purpose, in the ability to make a difference in others' lives. You are a poor man living in a golden prison, and no amount of money will ever be able to buy what you're missing." The silence that followed was deafening. Ethan's partners looked back and forth between him and the waitress with expressions of shock. Some customers at nearby tables had turned around, sensing the tension. Sarah held her gaze fixed on Ethan for another long moment, then straightened up, smiled with professional politeness, and said, "Enjoy the rest of your dinner, gentlemen," before walking away with perfect dignity. Ethan was paralyzed. No one had ever spoken to him like that. No one had dared. But more than the rage he should have felt, he experienced something different, something uncomfortable and unsettling, because a part of him, a part he had buried under layers of cynicism and success, knew that waitress was right, and this realization terrified him. Ethan couldn't sleep that night. In his villa in the hills of San Francisco, he found himself thinking about that waitress's words. Sarah. He had seen the name on her name tag. The next day, he called a private investigator. He asked him to find out everything about Sarah Martinez, waitress at the lighthouse. The report arrived 24 hours later. Sarah Martinez, 26 years old, from Phoenix. Economics degree from UC Berkeley, summa cum laude, thesis on sustainable finance. Had worked 2 years at Goldman Sachs, West Coast Division, excellent reviews. Then quit when her father was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. Medical expenses had depleted the family's savings. Sarah had taken out personal loans, working at the lighthouse 3 months, making the commute from Phoenix daily, tips going straight to creditors and oncologists. Ethan read the report 3 times. This woman had sacrificed a brilliant career to care for her father. She had more financial intelligence than many of his highest-paid employees, and had chosen love over career, values that Ethan had forgotten existed. For reasons he didn't understand, Ethan returned to the lighthouse the next night, alone. He asked for Sarah's table. When she came to take his order, Ethan did something he hadn't done in years. He apologized. He said the joke had been cruel, that he had been impressed by her analysis, and had researched her background. He admitted she was right about being a poor man in a golden prison, and asked if after her shift she would agree to talk with him. Sarah studied him for a long time. Then she said her shift ended at 11. They could talk, but it had to be clear. She wasn't looking for charity, didn't want pity, and wasn't a redemption project. Ethan laughed genuinely. He said he just wanted to understand how a waitress had managed to dismantle his existence with 3 sentences. That night, they talked for hours. Sarah told about her father, the decision to leave her career, the debts, the constant fear. Ethan listened, truly listened. Then he spoke of the father who had pushed him to success, but never to happiness, of the failed marriage, of the loneliness that no amount of money filled. When they left at 1 a.m., something had changed. Recognition. 2 people who truly saw each other. Before parting, Ethan made a proposal. His company needed consultants for a social impact investment project, exactly the area of her thesis. He was offering her a 6-month contract, competitive salary, enough to cover debts and medical expenses, in exchange for her competence and perspective. Sarah looked at him with suspicion. Ethan explained he had read her thesis. It was brilliant. His company invested $100 million a year. They could do better. She could show them how. Sarah set 2 conditions. Written and transparent contract. No favors. And if she thought he was taking advantage, she would leave immediately and publicly. Ethan smiled. They had a deal. The first days were strange. Sarah arrived every morning at Crawford Tech's offices, a glass skyscraper in downtown Manhattan, and worked in a luxurious conference room. The staff looked at her with curiosity. Who was this woman with direct access to the CEO? But Sarah ignored the rumors and concentrated on the work. Within 2 weeks, she had prepared a presentation that completely redefined the company's social investment strategy. Microfinancing for small businesses, green tech startups, educational programs. Her work was brilliant. Ethan participated in all meetings, initially as supervisor, then increasingly as student. Sarah didn't just understand finance, she understood people. She took him outside the office to visit disadvantaged neighborhoods, to talk with entrepreneurs who needed capital. Ethan began to see a world he had forgotten existed. Are you enjoying this story? Leave a like and subscribe to the channel. Now let's continue with the video. And while working together, something grew between them. Not just attraction, but respect, admiration, intellectual and emotional connection. Sarah saw in Ethan not the arrogant millionaire, but the intelligent man who had gotten lost in success. Ethan saw in Sarah an extraordinary woman who had sacrificed everything for love. Colleagues noticed changes. The CEO, cold and distant, suddenly asked questions about social impact. Rejected ethically questionable deals. For the first time in 15 years, his net worth wasn't the metric that defined him. He was discovering something more valuable. Purpose. It was during a dinner at a small restaurant in Brooklyn, 3 months later, that everything changed. They were discussing a project when Ethan suddenly said something unplanned. He said these 3 months had been the best of his life, that Sarah had changed him, and that he was falling in love with her. Sarah stopped for a long moment, said nothing. Then she put down her fork and said she also felt something but was afraid. Their worlds were so different, she was still technically his employee. Her father was getting worse. Ethan took her hand, said he understood the fear because he felt it too, but spending life scared meant not living at all. He wanted to try building something real together. Sarah cried, laughed, and said she must be crazy. But yes, she wanted to try. She set conditions. The professional relationship must remain transparent. If it didn't work out, they must be able to continue working together, and Ethan had to meet her father. Ethan accepted everything, and that night, when they kissed outside the restaurant under the New York mist, both knew they were starting something that would change their lives forever. Meeting Sarah's father was one of the most humbling and illuminating experiences of Ethan's life. Sarah took him to Phoenix one Saturday morning to the Martinez house, a modest apartment in a working-class neighborhood. The difference from Ethan's villa was stark. Robert Martinez was a 62-year-old man, reduced to a shadow by cancer, thin, pale, but with eyes that still shone with intelligence. When Sarah introduced Ethan, Robert studied him intensely. Then he asked directly what his intentions were toward his daughter. Ethan, accustomed to commanding boardrooms, found himself stammering. He said he loved Sarah, that he wanted to support her, that he hoped to have permission to court her. Robert nodded. Then he said he didn't care about the money. He only cared that whoever was with his daughter understood that Sarah was precious, and that if Ethan made her suffer, he would find a way to make him pay even from the grave. Ethan promised he would protect Sarah with his whole being. Then, with a flash of his old character, Robert asked about Ethan's business strategy. The two men spent the next hour in an animated discussion about economics. Sarah watched them with tears, seeing her father come alive. That visit changed Ethan. Seeing where Sarah came from, the dignity with which they faced adversity, gave him a perspective no MBA could have taught. He began visiting Robert regularly, bringing books, discussing business. Genuine respect developed between them. It was Robert who suggested Ethan consider investing in the revitalization of Phoenix's manufacturing industry. Ethan investigated, found real opportunities in sustainable production. He launched a $50 million fund dedicated to revitalizing the industry, creating partnerships with local craftsmen. The news caused a stir. During the press conference, Ethan explained it wasn't charity, but smart investment, and mentioned he had learned the importance of roots from someone he deeply admired. Journalists speculated, but Ethan kept Sarah out of the spotlight, protecting her privacy. Sarah appreciated this more than any romantic gesture, but not everything was perfect. 4 months into their relationship, a scandal erupted. A gossip tabloid published photos of Ethan and Sarah together with a salacious article that painted her as a gold-digging waitress who had seduced the billionaire. The photos had been taken out of context, private moments made sordid by the angle and the text. Sarah was devastated. The article mentioned her father's illness, the debts, her work at the lighthouse, painting everything as a calculated plan to trap Ethan. Online comments were brutal. They called her a prostitute, opportunist, social climber. Ethan was furious. He called his lawyers, threatened lawsuits, wanted to destroy the newspaper. But Sarah stopped him. She said reacting would only give more attention to the story. She said they knew the truth, and that was what mattered. But the damage was done. Sarah's colleagues on the project began treating her differently, some with pity, others with barely disguised contempt. Crawford Tech's board of directors called an emergency meeting, concerned the scandal would impact the company's image. Some members suggested Ethan should end the relationship with Sarah, at least publicly, until the waters calmed. Ethan categorically refused. In one of the most memorable performances of his career, he showed up to the board meeting with Sarah by his side and gave a speech that would be reported in financial newspapers for weeks. He said Sarah Martinez was the most integrity-driven person he knew. He said she was a brilliant consultant who had already generated value for the company far above her compensation. He said their personal relationship didn't compromise the professional one, but enriched it. And he said if the board had a problem with this, they could accept his resignation. because he would never sacrifice love for profits. The silence in the room was total. Then one of the oldest board members, a woman who had known Ethan's father, began to applaud. Others followed. Not everyone remained hostile, but the majority supported Ethan. Leaving the meeting, Sarah stopped Ethan in the hallway. She asked if he realized what he had just done, the risk he had taken. Ethan smiled and said he finally understood what it meant to have the right priorities. He said she had taught him that some things were worth more than money and power, and that love was one of them. They kissed right there, in the cold, sterile office hallway, not caring who might see, because they had stopped hiding. Robert Martinez died a year after Ethan and Sarah met, surrounded by his family. The experimental treatments hadn't worked, but they had given him precious months he wouldn't have had otherwise. Months in which he had seen his daughter fall in love and be loved in return. Months in which he had seen his beloved Phoenix manufacturing industry begin to be reborn thanks to Ethan's investments. Months in which he had made peace with his life. Before dying, Robert called Ethan to his bedside. With a weak but firm voice, he said that at first he had been skeptical about this billionaire who seemed from another world, but he had seen how Ethan looked at Sarah, how he had changed, how he had embraced values beyond profits. Robert gave Ethan his blessing and asked him to take care of his daughter, not with money, but with his heart. Ethan cried and promised he would do exactly that. The funeral was simple but dignified. Ethan paid for everything, but made sure it reflected Robert's wishes. Nothing ostentatious, just family and friends, a celebration of a life lived. Many old workers from Robert's textile company came to pay tribute, sharing stories of the generous man who had employed them for decades. In the months following the mourning, Ethan and Sarah clung to each other. Sarah's grief was deep, but Ethan was there, constant, supportive, learning that sometimes loving means just being present, not trying to fix everything. A year after Robert's death, on a November night marking 2 years since they had met at the lighthouse, Ethan took Sarah back to the restaurant. He reserved the same table, the one where 2 years before he had tried to ridicule her. But this time it was different. This time they were equals, partners, lovers who had faced storms together. During dinner, Ethan took Sarah's hand. He said that 2 years before, he had been an arrogant man who thought money was everything. She had shown him it was nothing without love, without purpose, without connection. He said she had saved him from an empty life and had given him something infinitely more precious, meaning. Then he knelt right there in the crowded restaurant, in front of all the VIP customers and staff, and took out a ring. It wasn't the biggest diamond money could buy. Ethan knew Sarah would hate ostentation, but it was perfect, elegant, meaningful. He asked Sarah to marry him, to be his wife, his partner in everything, to build a life together based on the values they now both shared. Sarah cried, laughed, and said yes. The restaurant erupted in applause. The staff, who remembered well that night 2 years ago and had seen the transformation, were particularly enthusiastic. Some were crying. The wedding was a month later, simple and beautiful, in a church in Phoenix where Robert and his wife had married decades before. Ethan had offered to organize a lavish event, but Sarah had wanted something intimate, meaningful, just close family and true friends. During the vows, both spoke not just of loving each other, but of continuing to grow together, of challenging each other, of building something bigger than themselves. They promised to honor Robert's memory, living with the integrity and purpose he had embodied. After the wedding, Sarah took on a formal role at Crawford Tech, Director of Social Impact Investments, a new department she had helped create. Under her guidance, the company became a leader in responsible investment, demonstrating that profit and purpose weren't mutually exclusive. Ethan, for his part, changed his leadership style. He became known not as the ruthless CEO, but as the one who cared about people as much as profits. The company's stock, after an adjustment period, rose to new highs as progressive investors rewarded the new approach. 5 years after that night at the lighthouse, Ethan and Sarah were sitting on the terrace of their home, no longer the ostentatious villa, but a more modest residence in the hills that felt like a real home, watching the sunset. They had 2 children playing in the garden, The foundation they had created in Robert's memory had helped hundreds of small businesses. The manufacturing fund had revitalized an entire region. Sarah leaned against Ethan, whispering who would have imagined a waitress and a billionaire could build this. Ethan kissed her forehead, saying he was no longer an empty billionaire, and she had never been just a waitress. They were simply two people who had found each other when both needed it and had saved each other. Because sometimes the most important lessons come from the most unexpected sources. Sometimes life-changing advice comes from someone in a red apron instead of a custom suit. And sometimes the truest love begins with the hardest truth. That having everything means nothing if you don't have someone to truly share it with. Like if you believe true wealth is measured in connections, not bank accounts. Comment sharing a moment when someone changed your perspective on life. Share this story to remember that wisdom and courage can come from anyone. Subscribe for more stories that demonstrate how humility and open-mindedness can completely transform a life. Sometimes it takes someone with nothing to lose to tell us the truth no one dares to speak. Sometimes we need to face our emotional poverty to understand what it means to be truly rich. And sometimes the most casual encounter, born from a cruel joke, can become the connection that saves two lost souls. Because in the end, it doesn't matter how many zeros you have in your bank account if your heart is empty. And it doesn't matter how little you possess if you have love, purpose, and integrity. That is the true wealth no one can ever take from you.